Dr. Xiao, Chairman of the Taiwan Asia Exchange Foundation, former Prime Minister of Australia, Malcolm Turnbull, former Prime Minister of Sweden, Carl Bildt, members of the Japan's House of Representatives, Keiji Furuya, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure to welcome you all, especially the many guests who are joining us online for this year's Yushan Forum. I am also delighted that a number of international friends who are unable to attend in person have for the first time taken the initiatives in recording messages for this important event. This year marks the 4th edition of the Yushan Forum, which serves as a dynamic platform to promote dialogue and deeper cooperation between Taiwan and its partners in the South and Southeast Asia, as well as Australia and New Zealand. This year is a particularly challenging year due to the COVID-19 pandemic. This pandemic has fundamentally altered how we live, think, and behave. Thanks to advanced technology, the internet, and Taiwan's success in containing COVID-19, we are able to convene the Yushan Forum this year. Through video conferencing, the forum participants will discuss regional development cooperation and global governance issues in the post-pandemic era. We will also explore how the new southbound policy can enhance collaboration between Taiwan and partner countries once the pandemic has subsided. In recent years, the Indo-Pacific region has accounted for 50% of the world trade and 60% of global gross domestic product. The region now plays a pivotal and increasingly influential role in the development of global industrial supply chains. However, the escalation of strategic competition in the international arena has produced major changes in the geopolitical and economic landscapes of the Indo-Pacific. Our democratic system and security continue to face persistent military threats and provocation from particular sources. As the COVID-19 pandemic continues to ravage the globe, these developments pose unprecedented challenges to our shared prosperity and way of life. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, countries worldwide are facing industrial supply chain restructuring, stagnant economic growth, constrained movement of people across borders, lack of market confidence, and many other serious issues. During all of this, Taiwan has maintained a relatively strong position in Asia and the world through the concerted efforts of our compassionate and resilient people. We have safeguarded our democracy, overcome persistent security threats, and weathered economic challenges. We are able to quickly respond to the rapid changes in the global environment through organizational efficiency, respect for professionalism, and decisive leadership. We have leveraged our democratic system, universal health insurance and medical care system, as well as our experience in combating SARS in 2003, to implement a comprehensive government command system to fight the coronavirus. Our endeavors are also underpinned by integrated cross-ministerial resources and capabilities, public-private sector cooperation, big data, and smart technologies. Our approach in containing and preventing the spread of coronavirus has been proactive, decisive, and most importantly, transparent. As of this week, Taiwan has approximately 500 confirmed cases, while related deaths remain in single digits. Our people have been going about their lives as usual. There were no lockdowns in our cities, and our economy continues to grow and has performed better than the other Asian tigers. Taiwan has once again demonstrated its resilient spirit, leading by example and creating a successful model for the region and the international community. Former Prime Minister Turnbull and many participants with us today are prominent leaders and experts who will steer the Indo-Pacific region forward and shape its vision through our shared values. Countries in the Indo-Pacific region and Taiwan are complementary in many ways, and Taiwan is willing and able to collaborate with our Asian partners. Therefore, since taking office, I have been proactively promoting the new southbound policy in the spirit of Taiwan helps Asia and Asia helps Taiwan. We hope to work with regional partners to foster sustainability and share responsibilities, which aligns with the theme of this year's Yusan Forum, that is, forging a resilient future together. The new southbound policy is Taiwan's regional strategy for Asia. Its goals and ideals coincide with those of the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific and India's Act East policy. Working together, these initiatives can achieve mutual benefits with complementary economic and social successes. Taiwan has donated millions of face masks as well as protective suits and pandemic prevention supplies to our new southbound policy partner countries. In addition, Taiwan and some of its partner countries have established a strategic alliance to ensure the supply of raw materials for pandemic prevention products. With that, we are actively working to fight COVID-19 together. One of the most important goals of the new southbound policy is to ensure sustainable prosperity for the Asian community. Since 2016, Taiwan has signed more than 70 agreements and memorandums of understanding with new southbound policy partners to bolster cooperation in diverse areas such as the economy, trade, education, agriculture, science, and technology. And despite the pandemic, we have continued to enjoy robust trade with these countries. Last year, trade between Taiwan and these partners totaled nearly $112 billion, and the figure for the first half of this year reached approximately $52 billion, holding steady year on year in spite of the pandemic. When it comes to education collaboration, more than 53,000 students from the region studied in Taiwan last year, and the number of students in industry, academia, collaboration programs also increased significantly. These educational programs not only train talents for national development, it also establishes connections for Taiwanese businesses in the partner countries. In tourism, there were about 2.8 million visits to Taiwan from tourists of our partner countries in 2019. That is a 6.8% increase. Taiwanese tourists reciprocated with 3.2 million visits, and that is a growth of 15.1% from the previous year. This has spurred the development of tourism industries in the region and record exchanges between our peoples. Under the new southbound policy, Taiwan and our partner countries have created mutually friendly investment environments. People-to-people relations have grown even closer, as have industrial linkages. Bilateral cooperation and exchanges have expanded in international healthcare, the halal industry, agriculture demonstration zones, e-commerce, and other domains. While Taiwan seeks to join the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, that is CPTPP, we also look forward to working with our regional partners to advance prosperity, peace, and stability through the signing of bilateral economic cooperation agreements. We will proactively contribute to the creation of a region that is open, free, inclusive, transparent, and equal, and operates under a rules-based order. We oppose any heavy-handed and unilateral aggressive actions that jeopardize regional security and solidarity. Any political attempt to prevent Taiwan from sharing its experience and making contributions does not serve the collective interests of the region. I very much agree with Chairman Xiao's observations during last year's Yushan Forum. He said the new South-Bound policy envisions 5 M's for Taiwan and its partner countries. That is, make wealth, make jobs, make friends, make families, and make values. And Taiwan has demonstrated time and again that it is an indispensable friend and partner for the region. Lastly, I would like to thank our good friends from Australia, the United States, and other like-minded countries who are participating in the forum to express their support for Taiwan in this uncertain time. I also want to thank those who are participating in the Yushan Forum online, including those from regional partners and European countries. Taiwan is looking forward to working with all our partners worldwide to build a resilient future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, President Tsai, for bringing such an informative speech. During this difficult time of the global pandemic, we're fortunate enough to receive warm greetings and congratulatory messages from prestigious global leaders through online meetings or recorded videos. We would like to invite Dr. Xiao to introduce these global leaders. Please join me again in welcoming Dr. Xiao to the stage.
Once again, before we proceed, I would like to specially welcome distinguished diplomats, representatives of our friendly countries who are present here. And also, we welcome Minister Zhang Den, who just arrived. It gives me a great pleasure to welcome the first keynote speaker from a global leader for this 2020 Yushan Forum, His Excellency Malcolm Turnbull, former Prime Minister of Australia. Please join me to welcome Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Dr. Michael Shao, Chairman of the Taiwan Asia Exchange Foundation. Your Excellency, President Tsai Ing-wen, Mr. Wellington Koo, Secretary General of the National Security Council, Dr. Joseph Wu, Minister of Foreign Affairs, good morning to all of your distinguished guests and attendees at the Yushan Forum. It's wonderful to be speaking to you. Thank you so much for inviting me to be here today. My only regret is that I cannot be there with you in person. The COVID-19 pandemic, of course, as the President just observed, has disrupted the world, inflicted enormous suffering around the world, but as Taiwan has demonstrated with ingenuity, with innovation, it can be grappled with and successfully. Today, the global community is looking at Taiwan more closely than ever before, and not because of increasing cross-strait tensions. COVID-19 has taken 1 million lives to date around the world, at least 1 million, over 20% of them in the United States alone. And the world is facing the harshest economic shock since the Great Depression. It is almost unprecedented for every community in the world, large and small, to be presented with the same challenge at the same time. And in that experience, it is remarkable that no country in the world has more effectively protected its citizens from the pandemic than has Taiwan. Thanks to swift and decisive action well before the pandemic was confirmed in China, Taiwan has had only 521 confirmed cases and 7 deaths. There have been no locally acquired infections recorded for months. Now, the response of Australia's governments have been very effective too, especially when compared to Europe or the United States. But it cannot compare to the achievement that you have sustained in Taiwan. Now, as Australia's Prime Minister, one of my signature economic policies was the National Innovation and Science Agenda. We live today in the most exciting times, sometimes the most terrifying times, but they are times where the pace and scale of change is without precedent. Now, in these times of rapid change, we have to make volatility our friend and constantly reimagine not just how we do business, but how we govern. So I was fascinated to learn how Taiwan was able to leverage open data and open governance to empower its citizens to protect themselves and each other. As your digital minister, Audrey Tang, has said, in a technologically vested democracy, if you give people data, as you do with platforms like VTaiwan, you give them the power to write their own fate and that of their nation. And what is most remarkable about Taiwan's world's best response is that it has been achieved in an open, vibrant democracy matched by a culture of collaboration and enhanced civic engagement. Congratulations, Madam President. Australia and Taiwan share ideals of freedom, democracy, and the rule of law. It's these democratic ideals that are threatened, as the President just observed, by the rising tide of authoritarian populism with its anti-globalist and protectionist agenda around the world. Now, protectionism has repeatedly been shown to be a costly failure. It isn't a ladder to get us out of a low-growth trap, but rather a shovel to dig it deeper. Combined with xenophobia, protectionism can develop into a toxic populist mix all too often stirred up by those who want to undermine our democracies. In the age of social media, of course, anyone can be a publisher. The financial model of traditional publishing and broadcasting has been shaken, if not shattered, and politics is being rocked by more lies, and I regret to say, more hatred than ever. We don't have to look very far to see examples of that. The moderate and the rational are shouted down by the extreme and often the unhinged. And that is why, more than ever before, we must make a case for our democratic values on which our free societies are founded, and in particular, for the mutual respect that makes it all possible. I mean, after all, mutual respect is at the very core of the concept of the rule of law. Now, mutual respect for the sovereignty of others underpins the rules-based order that has enabled our region's extraordinary economic growth over the last 50 years and more. But we know we cannot take any of it for granted. China's growing power continues to be the topic of the most intense debate, and nowhere more so than here in Taiwan. In a little more than a generation, over 800 million Chinese people have been lifted out of poverty. The scale and speed of China's transformation is unprecedented in all of human history. And the wealth that China has created is not limited to its own people. After joining the WTO in 2001, it's become the largest trading partner of over 100 nations, including Australia. We send nearly a third of all our exports by value to China. Now, with its growing market economy, and rising middle class. The hope was, the expectation was, that China would become a more liberal, even democratic society and match to some extent the transition that has occurred so successfully in Taiwan. And yet, what we are seeing today is China under President Xi Jinping, which has become more authoritarian at home and more aggressive abroad. Dissent, real or imagined, has been brutally put down in Xinjiang, where 1 million Muslim Uyghurs are being re-educated, I use that term advisedly, in detention centres. The freedoms guaranteed to Hong Kong in 1997, as we've seen, have been brutally suppressed. China's economic growth has been matched by an increase in investment in defence capabilities, with the goal of matching and then surpassing those of the United States. But China's growing power is not only found in fleets and armies, but much more so, more potently in fact, in RMB and dollars. Countries that displease China have been threatened with economic consequences. It might be boycotting Japanese retailers or stopping tourism to South Korea, as we've seen recently in Australia holding up beef exports and slapping tariffs on wine. On the other hand, and especially in the developing world, billions are being offered for infrastructure through the Belt and Road Initiative. And at a grittier level, the United Front Work Department coordinates political influence operations around the world by controlling, one way or another, almost all Chinese language media outside China, seeking to mobilise support among the Chinese diaspora in countries like Australia, and of course, making donations to politicians, as well as ensuring there are lucrative commercial opportunities after they leave office. Now, with President Trump's erratic and often belligerent style unsettling friend and foe alike, there was an opportunity for China to be as unlike Trump as possible, to be measured and conciliatory, to avoid overreaction, and indeed, as previous leaders had done, play the long game. If the goal of foreign policy was to win friends and gradually replace the United States as the most influential power in the region, President Xi's more aggressive foreign policy, the so-called wolf warrior diplomacy, has been quite counterproductive, just as the unilateral island building in the South China Sea has served to alienate ASEAN neighbours. Now, the principle my government followed was simply to assert and defend our nation's sovereignty and to manage our relationship with China respectfully and constructively, while at the same time prudently protecting our national security. My decision to ban Huawei and ZTE, for example, from the 5G rollout was not a political one, nor was it dictated from Washington. After careful technical analysis, we can conclude that because of the virtualization and distributed intelligence in a 5G network was not practically possible to mitigate the risk of high-risk vendors. The core, in other words, was no more. The distinction between the core and the edge, radio access network, was no longer a viable one in the 5G environment. Now, a threat, after all, is the combination of capability and intent. Capability can take years to put in place. Intent can change in a heartbeat. So the Huawei decision was not an accusation that the company was acting in a manner adverse to our interests, but rather a recognition that its capabilities could be so used and, if required, by the Chinese government would be. In other words, it wasn't the identification of a loaded gun, it was the identification of a loaded gun, not a smoking one. So our response to China's more assertive approach under President Xi must be to define the boundaries of trust which limit areas of cooperation, telecommunications and critical infrastructure being a good example. At the same time, we acted to ensure our laws were updated to protect against foreign interference or undisclosed foreign influence in our politics. Now, many countries, like Russia, most notoriously, I suppose, seek to engage in that. But in Australia, China's activities have been particularly notable. Now, these foreign interference and foreign influence laws enacted in 2018 were vociferously objected to by Beijing, but without trading inflammatory rhetoric with the Global Times, for example, we quietly ensured they were passed into law, making unlawful efforts by foreign governments or political parties to corruptly, coercively or covertly influence our public affairs. For the future, we must maintain our commitment to our democratic values and sovereignties. They should not ever be for sale. It's important to remember too that in the imperial capital, they regard deference as their due. Regular threats of trade sanctions must be stared down. The buckle in the face of them will only ensure more to come. Reaction or retaliation should also be very carefully calibrated. There is no point getting into a cycle of indignation. Equally, we must not be mesmerised by the great powers. Our region in particular contains many powerful economies, including Japan, the world's third largest national economy, and G20 members, South Korea, Indonesia, and Australia, as well, of course, as Japan and China. We have to continue to build a multipolar world and see our region not as a series of spokes ending in Washington and Beijing, but as a mesh which is strengthened by multilateral agreements and relationships. That's why I made stronger ties with Japan, ASEAN, especially Indonesia, and, of course, India as well, another G20 member. A key objective of my foreign policy, a strategy continued by my successor. Indonesia, for example, is the fourth largest nation by population, and within a decade will be the fifth largest national economy. Demography is destiny. Now, cooperation is key here. We must continue to work together. As Taiwan has shown in its efforts to combat COVID-19, real change is possible through collaboration, particularly where the people trust their government, where their government is open and transparent, where the people are brought in as partners. That enables the type of action, the swift action that Taiwan was able to undertake, and other countries can only admire, perhaps envy, and wish they had emulated. Now, that's why events like the Yushan Forum are so important. We must continue to expand the opportunities for cooperation and facilitate the exchange of ideas, talent, technologies and social initiatives. That's what's fundamental to our democracy. That's what will keep our region strong. That's what will ensure the peace and the prosperity in our region for the years to come. That's what will ensure that we don't move into a world where might is right, where, as Lee Kuan Yew warned back in the 1960s, where you have the big fish eats the little fish and the little fish eat the shrimps. That's not the world we wish to live in, whether it is domestically in our own societies or internationally. The rule of law, mutual respect are the keys, and that's why we must work together in the region as a mesh of countries with shared values to protect our sovereignty. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister, for your good words on Taiwan's handling COVID-19 pandemic, and also your insistence, which I believe firmly too, that democratic value and mutual respect are as the only principle in handling the global affairs so that we can live in a peaceful water together. Now, let me welcome the second keynote speaker for 2020 Yushan Forum. And it gives me a pleasure to welcome, please join me to welcome former Prime Minister of Sweden, His Excellency Carl Bildt. Due to the time inconvenience of
Excellencies,
the meeting,
dear friends, let me start, of course, by extending my thanks for this very honourable invitation to address you, but also to say at the same time that, of course, I profoundly regret not being with you in Taipei today, both for the conference and discussions there itself, but also the informal discussions among friends from different parts of the world that are so important when it comes to developing not only friendships further, but also share experience, learn from each other, and develop new bonds. We are indeed, all of us, living in times that are both unusual and very demanding. The COVID-19 crisis has profoundly affected virtually every corner of our world. And the World Health Organization, unfortunately, continues to report, as I record this message, rising numbers in very large parts of the world. Indeed, if I look at my Europe, we see now again rising infection rates in virtually every country. Not at the levels we had, but still enough to be worried as we look ahead. Time will indeed come when it comes to draw the lessons that needs to be drawn from this particular crisis. Taiwan is most certainly to be congratulated on its early, on its decisive, and on its so far very successful response. There are very many around the world that are eager to learn from the lessons that your good experience does represent. The pandemic has very clearly demonstrated, if we didn't knew it before, that we are all together. And that is only when we are able to freely exchange all the information, quickly learn from each other, and seamlessly work together, that we as a global community have the possibility to meet a challenge of this profound magnitude. And it goes, of course, without saying that Taiwan, along with everyone else, must be part of these efforts. To put up political barriers against anyone is to diminish the possibilities of success for everyone. At the end of the day, it's not more difficult than that. But the pandemic, difficult as it is not the only challenge that we are facing these days. We see distinctly geopolitical tensions rising. We have here in Europe primarily, of course, a revisionist Russia. We have an assertive China, more and more subject to a global debate. And we have at the moment, let's be honest about that, a rather disruptive United States. And this also leads to a profound crisis for the multilateral system and therefore for the United Nations, its Security Council, that is at the heart of this system that means so much to us all. There is even increasing talks about the risks for crisis and conflicts and confrontations in different parts of our world. And a crisis somewhere will affect us wherever we are. We should have learned that particular lesson. And all of this happens when new digital age. And sources of energy.
sorry about that.
That we're able to handle the enormous global challenge that climate change is. Taiwan has been an example, not only when it comes now for handling the COVID crisis. Further back, you undertook a transition from an old authoritarian to a democratic system that was of profound importance, not only for yourself, but also as an example for others. And since then you have demonstrated shifting power back and forth between different political leaders and different political parties in a way that mature democracies in fact do. And your economic advance, as well as your success in high and sophisticated technologies, are also profoundly impressive. You have demonstrated both not only a free and democratic political system, but you've also demonstrated the enormous potential of an open and competitive free economy. And that message is hopefully not lost on those that have yet to make those important decisions, be they nearby or be they far away. The theme that we have for discussion at this conference is most topical: paving path to our resilient future. There are certainly different experiences in different parts of our world, but I still believe that there is a shared feeling that we must now strive to build societies and systems that are more resilient than they've been in the past, since it is highly likely that we are facing a future that is going to be more turbulent than what we have experienced in the past few decades. After decades when progress seemed to know virtually no limits, we have been in more uncertain waters with the global economy since the financial crisis of 2008, and the dramatic downturn in the global economy that we are experiencing with the COVID-19 crisis has only made this particular situation more challenging for us all. There is no way back from a world where interdependence is increasing, and that applies also to our economies. The increase in the flow of goods might not return to the rapid rates of increase that we saw primarily prior to 2008, but what we see instead is, of course, an enormous increase in our interdependence in data flows, and in our digital age, that dependence is going to be even more important than the dependence that we had on the flow of goods in previous decades. Resilience is discussed in different ways in different parts of the world. There are some who believe that resilience can be built by isolation, by building walls, by cutting off from the rest of the world. That is a dangerous delusion. What is important to recognize is that resilience requires economies and societies that are rapidly adjustable to new circumstances and have the levels of skill that requires. The world will change, new challenges will appear. The way in which we have building societies that are adaptable will, at the end of the day, I think, decide how resilient those societies are in any given situation. And I think that we will see political leaders around the world increase Taiwan should be fairly well positioned for this development. COVID-19 is unfortunately unlikely to have been the last pandemic that we will experience. Indeed, the new report that is just out from the Global Preparedness Monitoring Board of the WHO explicitly demands that we now start preparing for the next pandemic that they believe at some point in time will come. And here, everyone is obviously needed. The European Union is among those that are clearly saying that Taiwan must be able to come back to the position it once had in the system of collaboration, exchange of information and working together that the World Health Organization represents. This will help Taiwan, but it will also make it possible for Taiwan to help the world. But resilience must also be political. In a turbulent world, we must have political systems that enjoy the trust of those that they are representing in order to be able to deal with all the challenges that are well beyond what we can envisage today. And here, of course, open and representative political system democracies, for short, have obvious advantages. Its leaders must, by necessity, seek the trust and the confidence of the peoples. And that makes it far easier if a crisis comes and a new challenge is there on the horizon, far easier for the people to put their trust and their confidence in their leaders when the storms are approaching and when times start to get rough. An authoritarian system on the surface always looks strong and stable. But all of the experience of history is that they can be very brittle, as they don't necessarily enjoy the trust and the confidence of the people that is really necessary when it comes to handling also difficult issues. So safeguarding our free and open political systems is also a very important part of our efforts to pave a path to a more resilient future for us all. These and very many other issues I had hoped to be able to discuss with all of you in Taipei during a couple of interesting days. But now we are where we are, and we must utilize the new technologies, these new means of communication, to trying to exchange experience that we can under these circumstances. But I sincerely look forward to the days when I can be in person in Taipei. And in the meantime, I wish you all the luck in all what you're doing and in the discussions during the next hours and days. Thank you.
Thanks to Prime Ministers.